Epa, 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 ¿cómo le va, don Serginho? Qué entrada rara hoy,
Sí,
así por
sí,
los dos
sí,
de
sí,
costado.
sí. Bueno, el programa se lo vamos a dedicar a nuestro amigo Simio. Eh, Espera que está, ahí tendremos los tres directamente.
Ahí está el rockstar del grupo, ¿cómo le va?
¿Cómo andan?
¿Todo bien?
Todo tranqui.
Uno entra con toda la energía, ¿no? De la emoción, ¿no? De la charla que vamos a tener, pero sí, una locura esto. Bueno, todos los que estamos acá escuchando lo del otro lado, todos amigos de Simio, un tipo que se hizo querer horrores y bueno, como cuando habla con la familia, el simio no está, pero el simio está, va a estar siempre, ¿no? Van a extrañar los mensajitos de WhatsApp del ocaso este, pero no, nos va a acompañar siempre acá.
Sí, la verdad que no hay mucho, por lo menos yo no tengo mucho para decir. Se lo va a extrañar mucho.
Totalmente de acuerdo. Así, el programa de hoy, y yo te diría todo lo demás de ahora en adelante, se lo tenemos que dedicar al simio.
Así es, así es. La verdad que una persona con una luz, una sonrisa hermosa. Así que bueno, nada, tenemos un
Para la
máster
esposa,
que
los
va a estar ayudando.
250 hijos que tiene, no solamente los reales de sangre, sino todos los hijos que tiene perdidos por ahí, que ayudó a criar, a enseñar los caminos de la vida. Así que un abrazo gigante para todo el mundo.
Bueno. Eh,
Freddie Mercury lo dijo.
¿Arrancamos? ¿El show debe continuar?
El show debe continuar y él seguramente nos esté acompañando y escuchando. Cuando aparezca alguna brujería acá o una pregunta rara va a ser de él seguramente viniendo.
Seguramente, sí, 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 sí. Así que bueno, vamos a estar pendientes de todo. A seguir, tenemos un muy lindo vivo. Vamos a estar revolviendo un poco las raíces de Motu, de Master of the Universe. Así que bueno, nada, ¿les parece si le damos la entrada a nuestro amigo?
1000% listo. Es un muy buen
Perfecto.
montón de historias, tengo que avisarle a todo el mundo. Así que prepárense para unas respuestas en detalle de todo, como buen escritor, ¿no?
Bueno, le damos la bienvenida a nuestro amigo Michael Halperin.
Ahí lo tenemos. Michael, ¿cómo anda? Gracias por meterse esta noche con nosotros un rato.
Muchas gracias.
Sorry for that.
No, it's okay. We need translations underneath here. Closed captions.
There you go. I'll send them over later. Michael, para que sepan, habla muy poquito español, así que igual voy a estar haciendo la traducción, pero él entiende bastante, por las dudas, para que sepan todos. So, Michael, bueno, como siempre, la primera pregunta, discúlpenme el atrevimiento, pero siempre me gusta preguntar y arrancar con la de dónde nacieron, de dónde vinieron, cómo se convirtió en Michael, que es ahora. Y disculpen todos, chicos, después los vamos a estar saludando a todos. Es que, bueno, nada, como queríamos sacarle todo el jugo posible a Michael, queríamos empezar enseguida. So, Michael, I usually like to start the first question and take the first step here. And my question for you is, how did the little Michael Halperin become the Michael Halperin that we're seeing here today? How do you become the writer you are? Where do you get the inspiration? How do you get to be here?
It's. I don't want to make this into a long story and biography, but it really started when I was a little kid. When I was a little kid, I used to listen to the radio in those days, and every Saturday morning, there was a radio show out of New York. I lived in New Jersey, so a radio show out of New York called, God, I can't remember the name of the show now, but I wrote about it in an article. Anyway, they did fairy tales. And it was sponsored by Cream of Wheat, by the way, and I still remember the theme song. Cream of wheat is so good to eat. We eat it every day, and I would listen to this, and it was just wonderful. And they, at the end of every show, they would have the announcer would come on and say, "Oh, it's called Let's Pretend." That was the name of the show. Let's Pretend. And I was fascinated by it because he did these fairy tales, and it was wonderful. You were introduced to a whole world of, imagery of trolls and princes and princesses. And I thought it was wonderful. And it was done from New York, right across the river from where I lived. And at the end of each show, they would say, if you want to get tickets, if you live nearby, you want to get tickets to the show, just send us a note. And they had an address where you send it. This was before emails. And so I said, okay, I was about, 8 years old, and I sent it in, and I received tickets for the show. And I said to my parents, I said, I'm going to go see the radio show. And they said, in those days, they let kids go wherever they wanted to go. They didn't think about danger. So I got on a bus, and I went through the tunnel, the Hudson Tubes into New York. And I went to Radio City Music Hall, where they had to NBC. And I got in there, and I walked in, and I saw them doing the show. And it wasn't what I expected. I expected to see, people playing princes and all that sort of thing. And instead, they were standing in front of microphones with scripts in their hands. And they were doing all these wonderful voices. And they had a guy in the background who was the sound effects man who had these coconuts. And he would clip them together to make horses' hooves. And I said, this is incredible. Wow, what a wonderful idea. I want to be a writer. I want to write this. I want to do this. That was the start. So I had this dream in my head about being a writer at that early age. And later on, when we came to California, and I went to high school here in California, in the Los Angeles area. And I had a teacher, an English teacher, whose name I still remember because it was a wonderful name, Cutlip, Mr. Cutlip. And Mr. Cutlip gave the class an assignment to write a short story. And this is close to the Christmas holiday season. So I decided to write a story, and I wrote it, and I handed it in. It took me maybe 40 minutes to write the story. And I handed it into the class, and I figured that was it. And I got an A on the story. I got a good grade. And then a few weeks later, I received a check in the mail for about $120 from a national magazine. And it turned out that my teacher liked the story so much, unbeknown to me, he submitted it to a national magazine for their Christmas edition. And I got paid. I said, gee, I only spent 40 minutes on the story, and I got paid. What a wonderful way to make a living. Big mistake, but that was, but that was what happened. And the story, it turns out, I actually wrote a Christmas story about Jesus. And the teacher said to me, wait a minute, you're Jewish. Why are you writing a story about Jesus? And I looked at him and I said, well, Jesus was a Jew. Who would know better? Right? And that was my snarky answer, right? And again, that was like one of these things that happen to you where you say, maybe I'm meant to do this. And then when I went to college, I went to the University of Southern California, and I was a communications major. And I had a teacher who taught Shakespeare, he was a great teacher, named Frank Baxter. And he not only taught at the school, he also had one of the first educational programs on a local educational TV station called KCET, Channel 28, where he taught Shakespeare on camera. It was wonderful. And he taught Shakespeare, but he never taught the plays. He taught the environment in which the plays took place, the time at which the plays took place. And I thought it was wonderful. And he was very funny. So I took notes while he was writing all the jokes that he told. I wrote it all down, and I wrote a screenplay called Too Much Caviar about a teacher who becomes a star on public television, and he gets sucked into the whole show business environment until he realizes this is crazy. I've got to get out of here. That's why it's called too much caviar. Too much caviar. If you eat too much of it, you get sick. And I call it that. My brother was a publicist at Warner Brothers, and he stole the screenplay off my shelf in the house, and he brought it to Warner Brothers, and he gave it. And he was the publicist he was one of the major publicists for all of the James Dean movies, starting with Rebel Without a Cause all the way through Giant. And he gave it to James Dean. Now, I had met James Dean because of my brother. I went on a lot. I used to see him, and we used to talk together. At one point, that car that he got wrecked, that he died in, it didn't happen at this time. But he asked me to push it to get it started because it didn't have a self-ignition. They took it out so it'd make the car lighter. So you had to push it to get it started. And I helped him push the car, and it got started. Anyway, he gave it to James Dean. James Dean really liked it. He thought it was very funny. And he gave it to one of the head writers at Warner Brothers, a man named John Gay. And John Gay gave it to a producer at the studio, and they optioned it. And I thought I was in heaven. Of course, I got, in those days, getting a couple of $1,000s was a lot of money. This is back in the 1950s. And I thought, oh my God, this is great. Another one of those things that happen that say you've got to be a writer, right? And it was option. It was never made into a movie, by the way. They decided to make a movie based on a TV series called Our Miss Brooks, which is a contemporary comedy show. But I got paid for the option. And that was sort of the beginning of my career. That's what happened. It's one thing after. It was sort of everything was an accident. It seemed like an accident.
Yeah, destiny.
Whatever it was. And then I ended up not doing that kind of writing. When I graduated college, I ended up writing documentaries, writing, producing, and directing documentary films. And I loved that. And I'm looking up at the wall right now. I'm looking at all the awards I won for my documentaries. And that was a lot of fun. One day I was watching television, and I was watching a television show. None of you may remember it. It was called Quincy. It was with Jack Klugman. And I looked at it, and my wife was standing behind me, and I said, I could write a show like that. And she looked at me, she said, well, why don't you? I said, I wouldn't know how to do it, how to get into to write these things. Now, I had become a member of the Writers Guild because I had done I was going to do a documentary about Bob Hope. So I had to be in the Writers Guild to do it. So they got me into the Writers Guild. The documentary never got made. But that's another story. But I was a member of the Writers Guild, and the Writers Guild had every year they did a conference up in Lake Arrowhead in California, Southern California. So I went there and I met a guy there, a writer named Jim Thompson. And I said, James, how do you get into writing television? He said, oh, it's easy. I said, it is? Because I was meeting all these other writers up there who were very famous. And I realized that they were ordinary people. They weren't giants. They weren't, some kind of mystical group of people. He said, it's easy. Just call the producer of the show. And I looked at him and I said, you can do that? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'll try. So I found the name of the producer of the show. And I called him. I called the office, Universal, by the way, at Universal. And I called them. And his secretary would answer and say, thank you very much. I'll let him know you want to see him. And I never heard back from them. And this went on for a couple of weeks. And finally, I was very young at the time. So, of course, I was also stupid. And so I said, well, I've got to figure a different way to do this. So I decided I would call the producer, call the studio twice a day, every day, once at 10 o'clock and once at 3 o'clock. And I kept calling and I kept getting that secretary. And then one day, the secretary was out to lunch and the producer answered the phone. And I said, "Hi, Peter. This is Michael Halperin. I'm a writer. I've written some plays and things. I'd like to come in and pitch. Quincy, I've got some great stories for you." And he said to me, "Okay, come on in. I'll tell my secretary when you call, make an appointment." And I was stunned. I said, "Okay." So I called the secretary. I went in. I had 3 or 4 storylines that I wanted to pitch. I pitched them. He said, "Those are really good storylines, but we're doing that show. We're planning to do that kind of a thing. Anyway, always an excuse not to do something." This went on for, I think it was 3 weeks. I pitched 27 stories to him. And finally he said to me, "You really understand the show. Don't call us, we'll call you." And I figured that was my time to go back doing documentary films. I'll never hear from him again. And a week and a half later, I got a call from him. He said, "We have a script that isn't working. We need to do a polish on the script. You think you can handle it?" Now, what am I going to say? No? I said, "Oh, sure, of course. I've never written a TV show in my life, by the way." I said, "Sure." So I did the polish. And 2 days later, I'm in bed, going to sleep with my wife who's next to me in bed. It's about 10 o'clock at night. Jack Klugman calls me on the phone. And he's really angry. He said, "You told me there were these things wrong with the script, and you told me this was wrong and this was wrong, and you didn't fix it." I said, "Jack, I was only asked to do a polish on the script, not a rewrite." And there was a long pause. And Klugman said, "Don't worry, I'm going to take care of it." The next day, I got a phone call from the producer, and he said, "I got a call from Jack. You've been given the rewrite on the show," which means a lot more money. I rewrote the show. They really liked it. It was produced. 2 weeks later, a story came out in the Hollywood press that Jack Klugman had decided that he was going to quit the show. That was the end of that, I thought, in terms of Quincy. Then I get a call like 2 days later that Jack changed his mind. He's going to do the show. And guess what? They don't have any scripts ready for the show. They need a script. This was on I can still remember this. This was on a Tuesday. I had to have the script ready by Monday. 62-page script. And he said, We'll need it by Friday. That gives me not much time to write it." I said, "Okay." He said, "But first, you've got to go to Malibu and meet with Jack at his condo." So I said, that's going to take like a half a day. That's a half a day not writing, but I have to do that. So I went to Malibu, and I went to his condo, and I opened the door, and I don't know if you remember when he played the character Oscar Madison, the slob, I walked in, and it was like walking into Oscar Madison's home. I had to step over a pile of clothes that were on the floor. There were clothes all over the place, dishes in the sink. This guy's rich. He could afford, he had a housekeeper, but I think she gave up. And we sat, and he sat, and I sat, and he talked about his character for the show. And I said, "Thank you." And then I had to leave, and then I had to do research because it had to do with a specific kind of, it had to do with cemeteries, and I had to find out how cemeteries operate. So by that time, I lost the whole day. I had literally 48 hours to write this script. And it was the scripts are normally 62 pages. I ended up writing a script that was 72 pages long. It was 10 pages too long. I called the story editor of the show, who lived near me, by the way, and he later became a famous novelist. He wrote detective stories. And I said, "It's 10 pages long. What do I do?" And he said, "Rip out 10 pages. Well, you can't do that. You have to rewrite the script. You have to make it, sensible. So I did that, and I didn't know if it was good or horrible. My first thing was this has got to be the worst script ever written. I submitted it to him, And I just waited. And then I got a phone call from the studio, and they said, Jack wants to see you on stage 42. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to. Now, he had a temper. I said, he's going to rip my heart out. And I go to the stage, and he's shooting a scene, and I'm standing behind the camera. And he finishes the scene, and he sees me, and he runs over to me, and he gives me a great big hug. He said, it's the best script we've ever had on the show. And I said to him, okay, you want to talk about the rewrite? We could sit down and do that. He said, we're not rewriting it. We're going to shoot it the way you wrote it. Never happened again. It's another one of those like crazy things that happened to me. That ended up getting me a contract, getting me an agent. William Morris Agency signed me because they didn't have any writers who could break the show. And they wanted to have someone who had broken the show. So they signed me. They were my first agent. And they got me a contract at Universal. And that was the beginning of my career.
I love the way you told that story, and I'm going to try to be as faithful as I can. I took notes of every single word. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to do my version of your story, okay?
Oh, my God. In Spanish? In Spanish?
Spanish, yes.
I thought you would translate it while I was going.
Oh, no.
Don't you have an auto translator?
No, I do it live. That is why I take notes so that I don't miss a word. Okay, here I go.
It's a long story. My God, we're going to be on for another hour.
There you go. Hey. Sí, chicos, necesito un aumento de sueldo. Me dijo, la primera frase que me dijo fue, no quiero hacerla larga, pero empezó la historia cuando yo era nene. Escuchaba radio todos los días. Él vivía en New Jersey, escuchaba un programa de radio de Nueva York, donde contaban cuentos de hadas, de magos, y él, bueno, lo presentaba justamente un programa, una marca que se llamaba Cream of Wheat, no sé si lo van a recordar.
Let's Pretend.
Let's Pretend se llamaba el programa, y Cream of Wheat era la marca que lo presentaba, y Michael nos cantó la canción de Cream of Wheat, estuvo buenísimo. Y bueno, se preguntaba al final de cada show, como dije, Let's Pretend, pretendamos, y le fascinaba cómo contaban los cuentos y las imágenes que tenían, trolls, príncipes, princesas. Esto pasaba frente al río, de un lado está New York, del otro lado está New Jersey. Y en el programa de radio decían, si vivís cerca y querés tickets para venir a ver el show cuando lo grabamos, mandanos una nota. Y él, obviamente, lo hizo, tenía 8 años, mandó una carta, recibió tickets para ir al show y le dije a mis padres que iba a ir a verlo. Era otra época, obviamente no se pensaba en el peligro. Se tomó el colectivo, cruzó el río Hudson por el túnel. El programa se grababa en NBC, en el Radio City Music Hall. Y fue y los vio haciendo el show, y honestamente le esperaba algo diferente, tipo actuaciones, pero ahí estaban los actores parados en sus tarimas leyendo el guión, y atrás de ellos había una persona que hacía los efectos especiales, por ejemplo, con 2 cocos haciendo el ruido de los caballos correr. Y él dijo, qué buena idea esto, quiero hacer esto, quiero escribir esto. Así que lo soñó desde esa edad, básicamente. Más adelante, cuando él se mudó a California, fue a la secundaria de Los Ángeles, y un profesor de él que se llamaba el señor Kutlik le dio una tarea. So far so good, right? Le dio una tarea que era escribir un cuento corto. Le tomó 40 minutos escribir el cuento corto, se sacó una A en la prueba que tenía. Una semana después le llegó un cheque por $120 de una revista nacional. Lo que pasó es que el profesor de él le gustó tanto la historia que la envió a la revista esta nacional para la edición navideña, y dice, yo no puedo creer, gané $120 y estuve 40 minutos haciéndolo. Esto tiene que ser una buena carrera. Obviamente él dijo luego, esto fue un gran error, pensé que iba a ser genial y fácil, y la verdad no fue fácil, pero bueno, la historia de Navidad que escribió estaba relacionada también con Jesús, y el profesor le dijo, pero ¿cómo escribiste de Jesús? Vos sos un chico judío. Y dice, bueno, ¿qué más de Jesús, saber de Jesús para Navidad que Jesús que era judío? Así que bueno, eso era una de las cosas, tal vez del destino. Después, más adelante, fue a la Universidad del sur de California, consiguió un título en major en comunicación. Había un profesor que enseñaba Shakespeare, se llamaba Frank Baxter, vamos dando todos los detalles. Enseñaba en la escuela y a su vez tenía un programa de educación en una TV KCET del canal 28, que enseñaba a Shakespeare en cámara también. Obviamente no enseñaba las clases de cómo actuar Shakespeare, sino te explicaba del tiempo, del ambiente, dónde se llevaba. Y bueno, con muchas bromas también. Y bueno, Michael lo que hacía, tomaba notas de las bromas y de ahí se les ocurrió la idea de escribir un guión que se llama Demasiado Caviar, Too Much Caviar, que se trataba de un profesor que de repente se atrapa, también un profesor de escuela que se atrapaba en un mundo del show business de Hollywood, y llega un momento que se vuelve loco, por eso el título, Demasiado Caviar, que lo volvió loco y quiere volver a salir de ahí. Ese guión lo tenía en su oficina, lo tenía en la oficina. Su hermano era publicista de Warner Brothers y lo que hizo, le robó el guión de su casa y se lo llevó a la Warner Brothers. El hermano era publicista de todas las películas que hacía James Dean, desde Rebelde sin Causa hasta Gigante, y a James Dean le gustó el guión. Dice, lo llegué a conocer a James Dean, es más, una vez se le rompió el auto y se lo tuve que empujar, y bueno, nada, gustó muchísimo el guión, y a la Warner Brothers también gustó tanto, que uno de los escritores que agarró el guión, John Way, lo que hizo es lo subastó, lo puso en subasta para la Warner Brothers por si alguien lo quería hacer. Y dice, bueno, yo pensé que estaba en el cielo. Escribir por un par de miles de dólares un guión en los años 50 era una fortuna, como se pueden imaginar. Y dice, bueno, otras cosas que pasan es que, bueno, terminaron haciendo otra cosa, no terminaron haciendo ese guión, pero dice, ahí empezó básicamente su carrera. Después de ahí empezó a escribir y producir documentales. Dice, yo amaba hacer eso. Y miro acá mismo, estoy viendo todos mis premios en la pared por hacer documentales, era muy divertido, y en esa época dice, miraba muchísima televisión y miraba el programa, creo que todos los conocemos acá, Quincy, es viejo el programa del año 76 al 83, y en el programa de televisión él estaba mirándolo y un día le dice a la esposa que estaba justo atrás mío, le dije, yo podría escribir algo así, y ella me dijo, y bueno, y hacelo, y le dije, bueno, pero la verdad no tengo ni idea de cómo hacerlo. Bueno, nada, una cosa llevó a la otra, llegó a convertirse en miembro del sindicato de escritores, gracias a que habría escrito un documental antes, y bueno, todos los años tienen una reunión en California. Bueno, conoció ahí a varios escritores, ¿no?, de televisión, y le preguntó a uno de ellos, que le dijo si le podía decir cómo es escribir un guión para televisión. Y le dijo, fácil, lo escribís y después lo que haces es llamás a los productores y le ofreces el guión. Dice, también una cosa que me llamó la atención es que el grupo de escritores eran gente normal, o sea, no eran personas de otro planeta los que escribían guiones de TV, sino gente normal. Y bueno, lo que dijo, pero pará, ¿cómo? Lo llamás al productor de la serie y le decís que querés escribir para la serie. Dije, bueno, es tan fácil, bueno, vamos a probar. Consiguió el nombre del productor, llamó a su oficina en Universal Studios, la secretaria le dijo, bueno, le voy a avisar, atendió la secretaria, dijo, bueno, le voy a avisar que usted llamó. Bueno, lo que hizo es volver a llamar y volver a llamar y volver a llamar y escribir y volver a llamar 2 veces por día, a las 10 de la mañana y a las 3 de la tarde todos los días, hasta, obviamente siempre la secretaria le decía que no estaba, hasta que un día la secretaria estaba comiendo y atendió al productor. Michael le dijo que tenía varias historias sobre Quincy, le dijo, ¿sabes qué? Bueno, arreglá con mi secretaria y vení directamente y haces una cita y venís y me presentás. Fui y le presentó 3 o 4 historias y bueno, nada, el director del show siempre le da excusas para no hacerlo y dice que pasaron 2-3 semanas, le presentó 27 historias hasta que un día le dijo, mira, vos entendés muy bien el show, no nos llames más, nosotros te vamos a llamar cuando te necesitemos. Y dije, bueno, listo, eso es todo, me vuelvo a hacer documentales. Y dice, 1 semana y media después lo llamaron por teléfono, que tenían un guión que no estaba funcionando, y le dijo, ¿hay forma que me lo puedas pulir al guión? Así que lo hice. 2 días después, Jack Klugman, que es el doctor Quincy de la serie, lo llama por teléfono directamente a su casa para decirle, ¿cómo que está mal? ¿Qué es esto que está mal el guión? No entienden. Y dice, no, a mí no me pidieron que lo reescriba, me pidieron que lo puliera. Y le dijeron, de nuevo, solamente reescribirlo, así que lo hice la reescritura, lo produjeron. 2 semanas después apareció una historia de que Jack Klugman iba a renunciar en el Hollywood Press, que iba a renunciar al show, justamente por este tema de las reescrituras de sus guiones. Claro. Y dijo, bueno, listo, hasta acá llegó mi carrera. 2 semanas después cambió de parecer pero en este momento ya no había más guiones porque él había renunciado Joe. Y dice, lo recuerdo, era un martes, tenía que tener un guión de 62 páginas escrito para el viernes. Pero primero tenía que ir a la casa del Dr. Quincy, de Jack Klugman, en Malibú, y conocerlo. Dice, bueno, mediodía voy a tardar en ir hasta allá, así que mediodía menos de escritura, pero bueno, voy. Fue, cuando entró, dice, obviamente, es un hombre muy rico, tiene una mucama, pero era honestamente la casa del Dr. Quincy, era ropa tirada por el piso, platos sin lavar, dice, como si la mucama se hubiera dado por vencida. Y bueno, lo que hizo, tuvo que averiguar muchísimos datos para escribir ese capítulo que le tomó todo el día, así que básicamente me dice, tuve 48 horas para escribir un guión de 62 páginas y lo terminé escribiendo de 72 páginas. Le dijo a un amigo del escritor, mira, tengo 10 páginas más, ¿por revisar lo que puedo hacer? Le dijo, hacelo fácil, arrancá 10 páginas del guión y mandalo igual. Y dijo, bueno, lo voy a hacer, pero no sé si va a ser bueno o terrible, así que lo que hice es lo envié y esperé. Me llamaron del estudio y me dicen, ya quiere verte en el stage 42, en el set 42. Cuando llegué dije, bueno, me va a romper el corazón. Estaba filmando Jack y dice que lo vio a él detrás de cámara, esperó terminar de filmar y se le acercó, lo abrazó, dice, le dio un gran abrazo y dijo, es el mejor guión de todo el show. Y le dijo, bueno, buenísimo, bueno, hablemos de reescrituras de guión. Y le dijo, no, lo vamos a filmar exactamente igual que como lo escribiste. Y dice, una de las cosas que me pasó a mí, le dio un contrato con la agencia, ustedes seguramente lo van a conocer, la agencia William Morris, era una de las agencias más grandes de actores, productores, bueno, de los que manejan, ¿no? Y se le consiguió su primer contrato con Universal y lo fichó William Morris a Michael. Chicos, disculpen la larguez de la historia, pero no quería perder absolutamente nada, porque como escucharon, todo tiene...
No, riquísima, boludo.
Sounds really good in Spanish. I recognize every fifth or 10th word.
Oh, that's good. That is good.
I'm gonna have to give my friends I have a very good friend. His name is Lázaro Viznia, who comes from Chile, and I'm gonna have to give him the YouTube.
Sure.
Because he writes. He's just finished a couple of books he wrote in Spanish, and yeah, he's a doctor. He's a physician, though. He's a retired physician, and we always talk about that. He loves the tango and things. And I wrote a play called Dancing with William Blake, which all the music is a tango in it, and it's a drama that we produced here in Los Angeles, which was great, and yes, things like that. However, what does all this have to do with He-Man?
Well, I always go with the first question. I just need to know
Igual,
where you get to be with He-Man.
Igual para que quiero que antes de arrancar con He-Man me gustaría, muchas gracias a Michael, preguntar, una cosa es ser escritor, ¿no? O sea, venimos de hacer documentales, a ser escritor de una serie de televisión, que obviamente es una pregunta media complicada, porque una cosa es ser escritor y otra cosa es pulir un guión de una persona que ya lo escribió. Tenés que meterte todo ese guión, entenderlo de una manera. ¿Qué diferencia hay exacta? Obviamente el crear es crear un guión, pero el pulir el guión, ¿cómo es el tema ese de pulir un guión? O reescribirlo.
Excelente pregunta. So, Michael, I'm sure you got that because of the reaction of your...
A little bit of it, yeah.
But yeah, Pelo, I think he has a really great question here. We know that you're a writer, you're a creator. You're, of course, the documentary writer, TV show writer. But he would like to know what is the different thing? What is the hard thing between just writing your own story and polish someone else's story completely? What is the magic?
Well, when you're polishing, polishing and rewriting is a term of art that's used by the Writers Guild to make sure you get paid the right amount of money. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Okay, you can do a polish, you can do a rewrite, or you can be the original writer, which in other words, you make the more money if you're the original writer. Secondly, if you polish a script, you don't get a residual if it's a television show, or royalty if it's a film. If you rewrite a script, then it has, this is going to sound, I know this is technical. If you rewrite a script, it goes to the Writers Guild to be adjudicated by a panel of other writers who determine whether or not you should receive credit. If you're the original writer, you obviously get a credit for it. Rewrites and writers very often get co-credits. And you can tell by looking at the screen where the name falls. It says screenplay by Michael Halperin, and then below it, it'll say and, without the, not with an ampersand, but with the word and Gus Weber. It means that you did the rewrite. If it says Michael Halperin with an ampersand and Gus Weber, it means we wrote it as a team. Now I know it sounds strange, but that's the way they do it. Teams get paid the royalty or residual, and they split it in half. If you are a co-writer like that, the determination of how much money you get is a little bit different. But those who do, if you do a polish, you don't get anything. It's just that you get paid for what you do, for the work you do, but you don't get paid a royalty. Because the Writers Guild is a union that's recognized by the government as what's called a Taft-Hartley union, which means it falls under regulations for all unions, whether you're a carpenter or a steel worker. It's a Taft-Hartley union. We're just like, in other words, our union is similar as a carpenter's union. You know, it doesn't make any difference. The rules are the same. That's the difference. What was the rest of the question?
No, as far as for the story itself, do you feel comfortable working in someone else's story?
I feel comfortable working in anything that pays me money. How's that? They're going to pay me, I'm going to do it, right? And I've done it before, I've done it since, I've done it ever after. You have to remember that when you're writing a television series, as an example, you're actually writing a show that somebody else has created. All television shows have been created by somebody. The only thing that I ever really created were 2 animated series, which is great. But when you write them, but you get paid quite well for the shows. I mean, originally I remember when I started writing television, and I was writing original stuff, original series, like for Jack. The Quincy thing was a sole credit, so therefore I got the full amount of the full pay for the show. I think at that time I think it was around $64,000 for writing a 1-hour show. That's pretty damn good, because then I ended up writing a lot of them, so it ended up being a good living. I did it for 20 years. I wrote for that show. I wrote for Quincy. I wrote for Knight Rider. I did Airwolf. I did BJ and the Bear. I don't know if you remember that show. BJ and the Bear.
We actually had Greg Evigan here.
Did you have Greg Evigan? I worked with Greg. I was on staff. I was a story editor for BJ and the Bear.
Wow.
And Greg and I, as a matter of fact, I met Greg not too long ago at a party, and we were talking about the show. And he was great. He was great, a great guy.
Lovely man, yes.
Yeah, and I did Fall Guy. I did the Fall Guy. With Lee Majors, and with that show, I was the executive story consultant. That was at Fox. But my career has been sort of not bad. I mean, up until after 20 years, then somebody at the end of the 20 years, somebody called my agent and said, "We really like him, but there's a problem. We think he's too old for the demographic. So we're not going to hire him." I said, "Well, they like the story, they like my writing. What's wrong?" He said, "It's your age." This is before they started having, you could sue. Today you can sue for something like that. In those days you couldn't sue. So I said, okay. So I said, well, I'm going to do something to prove that I can write for any demographic. So I wrote a young adult book that was published by Random House. And I just got the sales figures on it. It has sold over 1/3 copies. And I said, if I can write for kids, I can write for anybody. So then I started writing books and plays. One of the plays I wrote, by the way, when you mentioned James Dean, one of the plays I wrote was called Driving James Dean. And it was based on an incident that actually occurred with my brother. That was the time he gave the script to Dean. And it has to do with my brother, who was a press agent. And he was going to a party in Malibu where all these movie people and some rather famous people were, like the two surviving Andrews sisters from the Andrews Sisters trio were there, and a lot of actors and things. And he was driving James Dean to the party. My brother had an MG, little MG TD. I don't know if you've ever seen those cars. They're small cars, small sports cars. He loved it. I loved it too. And I was in college at the time, and I come out there, and who's sitting next to my brother in the car? It's Jimmy Dean. He's sitting between us. And I really liked Jimmy. He was a great guy. I think he was originally from Illinois or wherever, Indiana. He was from Indiana, and he was just like a regular Indiana farm boy. When I saw him, but he was such a great talent, and we had a great time. I remember driving up Pacific Coast Highway to Malibu, and he started singing, and I started singing with him. And the song he sang was, "There's a green light up ahead, there's a green light up ahead, there's a green light up ahead, it's turning red. The light is turning red, the light is turning red. Oh, look, the light is green, the light is green." And we were just singing this all the way up the Pacific Coast Highway. And he wasn't very tall, by the way. He was about 5'10". And I was taller than him. I used to be 6'1", and so I was towered over him. But he was about 5'10", and he wore very thick. He was very nearsighted, and the glasses he wore were like Coke bottles. I mean, the bottoms of Coke bottles, really. And I figured out that that great look he had in the movies when he would look like it's that smoky look, like, oh yeah, right, yeah, no, I know what's going on, That was because he couldn't see. I figured that out, but it worked for him, but he was a great guy. He was a sweet guy. He was clever. He was smart, and he had such a wonderful talent. I mean, and I remember the day he had that accident, the accident in the car where he got killed. I mean, my brother and I were just devastated. We were just devastated. He wasn't driving the car. His mechanic was driving the car, and there's a lot of mythology about that accident, but it's very simple. A guy drove into the oncoming lane, and they hit, and that was it. I mean, to see it, and he was only 28 at the time when he died. I think 28, 23, 20, something like that. And I was a lot younger. I was like 17 or 18 when that happened, and it was a very sad occasion. Anyway, good, nice story, sad story.
Yeah, no, totally.
And in terms of Masters of the Universe, that was sort of an accident.
Let me just translate this part, and then we'll jump into that.
Oh, okay.
But before jumping into that, I'm going to ask you a very small follow-up question about Star Trek: The Next Generation. But give me 1 minute. I'm going to translate this part, okay?
Oh, go ahead.
Dice, bueno, para la respuesta de Pelu, que quería saber cuál es la diferencia entre pulir, reescribir un guión o escribir un guión. Dice, cuando pulís o haces una reescritura, el término pulir o reescribir depende la plata que vas a ganar para el sindicato de escritores. Con un guión original, escribiéndolo vos solo, ganás más plata. Pulir, no recibís residuales de lo que es el show. Si lo reescribís, va al sindicato de escritores, se lo adjudican a un grupo de escritores para ver si recibís crédito o no. Usualmente no se da crédito, pero bueno, ellos deciden qué es lo que da crédito o no. Por ejemplo, si vos pones ves en una página escrito por Michael Halperin, N Gus Weber quiere decir que él lo escribió y yo, por ejemplo, lo reescribí o lo pulí. Si pone Michael Halperin y el de I, ¿no? Gus Weber es un trabajo en equipo. En ese caso, los dos reciben residuales y reciben regalías por eso, mitad y mitad. De las otras formas, es más diferente. Pulir no te pagan, por ejemplo, te pagan por el trabajo que haces, pero no por el guión. El sindicato de escritores justamente reconocido por el gobierno de Estados Unidos es como una unión, como si fueras un carpintero o tuvieras cualquier otro trabajo. La segunda parte era que Pelu había dicho, bueno, ¿cómo te sentís reescribiendo trabajo de otra persona? Y creo que eso lo entendimos todos. Como cualquier cosa que me paguen. Si me pagan, la hago genial. Lo hice antes, después lo voy a hacer más allá y lo voy a seguir haciendo. Para televisión, por ejemplo, escribís un show que alguien más creó, solo él creó desde cero 2 series animadas completas, pero bueno, te pagan muy bien por los shows. Dice, cuando empezó en la televisión para Quincy, escribía solo él para Quincy, y el sueldo que tenía en ese momento eran $64,000 por escribir solamente el show él. Esto estamos hablando, repito, del año 73 había dicho, ¿no? Que era Quincy. Dice, bueno, que trabajó 76, trabajó durante 20 años escribiendo para shows de televisión como El Auto Fantástico, BJ, Airwolf, The Fall Guy con Lee Majors, el hombre nuclear, y también, bueno, le consultaron acerca de historias. Dice, mi carrera no fue tan mala, pero bueno, después de 20 años, alguien llamó por teléfono a mi agente y dijo, nos gusta, pero tenemos un problema. Creemos que es muy viejo para los demográficos de la gente que está mirando las series. Y yo dije, pero pará, les gustan mis historias, les gusta mi escritura, pero le das un problema. Dice, en esa época no se podía hacer juicio, ahora les haría juicio por algo así, pero en ese momento no. Y me dije a mí mismo, bueno, voy a demostrarles que puedo hacer cualquier cosa. Y lo que hizo es escribir un libro para jóvenes adultos que logró vender 1/3 de copias. Y empezó a escribir, bueno, en ese momento, obras de teatro y libros. Por ejemplo, una de las obras de teatro basada en una historia real se llamaba Driving James Dean, conduciendo a James Dean. Fue justamente de un incidente que pasó con su hermano, que tenían bueno, recuerden, el hermano que era agente de prensa, estaba llevando a James Dean en una fiesta en Malibu, una fiesta donde estaban las Trio Sisters, había 2 de las Trio Sisters que estaban ahí, y él lo llevaba a James Dean y yo en el medio, en el auto GM chiquitito que tenía. Dice, me gustaba mucho, era un tipo muy copado, era un chico de campo, creo que era de Chicago o de Illinois, pero un pibe de campo, pero con un gran talento. Me acuerdo que íbamos manejando por la costa del Pacífico y James Dean empezó a cantar y yo empecé a cantar con él. Ahí viene la luz verde, se viene la luz verde y se va a poner roja. Era la parte que nos estaba cantando y repetía, se viene la luz verde, se va a poner roja. Así que, bueno, dice, no era un muchacho muy alto, yo medía más o menos un poquito más de 1,80 m, él era un poco más bajo que yo. Lo que sí usaba lentes de culo de botella porque no veía nada, y ahí me di cuenta que su gran imagen sexy de cuando miraba la tele y todo eso era porque no veía nada, pero bueno, le funcionaba muy bien a él para su imagen. Era un tipo muy dulce, inteligente, con un gran talento, y recuerdo muchísimo cuando tuvo el accidente y murió, mi hermano y yo estábamos devastados, creo que yo tenía más o menos 17 años, y hay mucha mitología con respecto al accidente. Dice, para mí no iba manejando él, iba manejando su mecánico, y la mitología es muy sencilla. Iba manejando y se le cruzó otro auto y chocaron y bueno, y ahí falleció James Dean. Yo tengo que decirles a todos ustedes, miren, que tuvimos muchísimos invitados y envidio muchas veces estar ahí tomándome un whisky charlando con gente, pero estar en un auto cantando con James Dean, se pone la luz verde, se pone la luz roja, me parece que sería mi top en la vida.
Insuperable, olvídate.
Gus, decile, por favor, muchas gracias por compartir eso.
Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Es una locura.
Una locura. Una locura. Increíble.
Estamos hablando de algo de coleccionismo, de dibujitos animados, de He-Man, y nos cuenta una historia real de Hollywood, la verdad, increíble. Muchísimas gracias.
¿Te acordás cuando estuvo la chica de Blade Runner que nos contaba que estaba en la calle y se encontró a Steve McQueen y le dijo, venía al set de filmación? Algo así. Pretty much the same. We had an actress from the movie Blade Runner, And she told us, my career started, I was on the street, I was a model, and suddenly Steve McQueen was driving by, and he said, hey, can you come join me? I'm shooting a movie here. And she started her acting career because she ran across Steve McQueen. So this is pretty much a crazy thing like this, running across Hollywood.
You know, it's a part of its luck. I mean, I guess I'd like to think part of its talent, but a lot of its luck. And even He-Man was sort of like out of the blue. That came out of the blue. I had written a Dungeons and Dragons screenplay because I just wanted to. It was based on the famous mythology of Beowulf. That was what it was based on. And a friend of mine was in I think it was in the marketing department at Mattel, and he said to me, "Have you ever written like a sword and sorcery screenplay?" I said, "Yeah, I haven't been able to get anybody to do it, but I think it's pretty good." He said, "Would you give it to me? I want to show it to somebody at Mattel." I said, "Okay." So he showed it to the director of male action figures, He-Man. That's the action figures that He-Man was, the department that did He-Man. And I got a call, and he said, the director wants to meet you. So I said, "What is it about?" He said, "Well, it's about a new toy we have on the market." I didn't even know what the toy was, by the way. So I went down to Inglewood where the Mattel main offices, and I met with the director, and he said, we had a long talk. He said he read the screenplay, he really loved it, and he said, "We want to hire you to write a new Bible for both marketing and a TV show we're planning to do about He-Man." He said, "We're having a problem." I said, What's the problem?" He said, "We're getting calls from the parents of children who have bought the toy, and they don't know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. So we have to sort of like get a story behind all the characters. Do you think you can do that?" And then I said, we need a Bible written for the TV series. You think you can do that?" I said, "It all depends on how much you're paying." It always comes down to that, right? So they made me an offer. We signed a contract, and I wrote the Bible, and I created. You saw some of the things that I sent you, the planet Eternia, the thing that my son did, and all that sort of thing, which is kind of fun. I actually drew the original. Here, I'll show you what it looks like now. This is a.
Prepárense.
Yeah, the planet Eternia. Yeah.
El original.
This is it here. Yeah. This is my picture. The picture that I drew was obviously rather crude, but it basically had all of those elements in it. And I did that.
Serginho, vos tenés, excuse me, Michael. Serginho, vos tenés ahí, si querés mostrar la foto que me mandó Michael del dibujo original de él.
Ahí la busca.
Sorry, Sergio. Sorry, Michael. Yeah, he has the drawing that you sent to me, so we can show it the original drawing.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. And so I wrote the Bible. By the way, we worked on this thing for almost 2 years, because I was working with the toy designers. I was working with the marketing department and everybody else, and everybody had to be satisfied that it was going to work for TV. Of course, we didn't know what was going to happen once it was on the air. Filmation was contracted by Mattel to do the series. They were actually very close to where I live, so it was easy to get there and back to deal with them. So I was the original creative consultant on the show. I was with them for a year, and I was responsible for approving all the stories. Some of them, every time I did one, I would, sometimes they didn't like what I said about the stories, but it was what it was, because I was responsible for making sure that Mattel's reputation was going to be properly presented. So they had, but that Bible and the way the characters were written, and the design of the characters and their personalities were very important in terms of the TV show, because they had to be sort of living characters, even though they were animated, and that's what I did. And I worked a year with Filmation, and then I got an assignment to develop another show, which was a live action show. Oh, there it is. This was my original great artwork. Yeah. With all my crazy notes all over it. See, there's Gray Skull is over there, and the other side is over there, and
Miren, para que vean, bueno, más ahora voy a traducir todo lo que dice Michael, pero este es el dibujo original que hizo él con su talento artístico. Él es escritor, obviamente no es dibujante, pero este es el outline original de Eternia. Todos los que tenemos el póster de Eternia como es, si lo comparan con esto, pueden ver dónde está Grayskull, Eternia, bueno, todas las partes fue un dibujo que lo diseñó Michael aquí. Sorry, Michael, carry on.
It's okay. It's okay. And that's the other side. That's the other side. That's Skeletor's side.
Y este es el lado de Skeletor.
Yeah. And then I came up, and one of the things I came up with is I said, Skeletor needs to have a home, not necessarily a home. He's got to have some place where he operates out of, like his throne room or whatever. And I came up with this idea of Snake Mountain. And they never thought of this on the show when they were doing the thing. And he said, well, what does it look like? I said, I don't know. So I went to my son, who today he's a very well-known, my son's a very well-known CGI artist. But at the time he was like, I don't know, 13 or 14 years old. But he was good. He knew he had a great imagination. And I said, Craig, what do you think Snake Mountain? He read the script in this. He said, what do you think Snake Mountain looks like? And he drew, there you go. He drew the picture. That's the interior of Snake Mountain. And he also did the exterior with the snake curling around the mountain. There it is, yeah. With the scales and everything. That's his handwriting up there. He didn't get paid to do this, by the way. I paid him. I gave him an advance on his allowance. But he thought it was fun doing it, and this was the artists at Filmation took this and they made it into Snake Mountain. So anyway, that's sort of the background on that. That's the hidden background of Snake Mountain and Eternia. I'm
going to go ahead and translate all of this part, Michael.
Okay.
Dice, bueno, de donde veníamos parte es talento y parte es suerte. Hasta He-Man fue de la nada, más o menos, que apareció. Había escrito Calabozos y Dragones, que viene de la mitología de lo que es Beowulf, y un amigo mío estaba en marketing de Mattel y él me dijo, ¿alguna vez leíste le preguntó si había leído el guión del hechicero? Le dice, ¿me lo podrás dar? Porque quiero mostrárselo a alguien en Mattel. Lo llevó, se lo mostró al director de Mattel, al director de figuras de acción para nenes. Dice que lo llamó directamente y le dijeron, bueno, él quiere conocerte. Le pregunté, bueno, ¿de qué se trata? Es acerca de un juguete nuevo que tiene en el mercado. Dice, yo ni lo conocía. Así que fue a Mattel, que estaba en Inglewood, y bueno, fue ahí, le leyó el guión, le dijo que le gustó y le dijo que lo querían contratar para escribir una nueva Biblia y un nuevo show que iban a estar haciendo. Pero tenemos un problema. Dice que los padres de los nenes nos están llamando por teléfono porque compran los juguetes pero no saben quiénes son los buenos y quiénes son los malos. Y dice, ¿pensás que podrías hacer eso? Necesitamos una Biblia para el programa de televisión. Y él le dijo, sencillo, depende cuánto me paguen. Le hicieron una oferta, firmó contrato, escribió la Biblia y dice, bueno, vieron las cosas que mandé, los dibujos que mandé. La foto que es muy cruda del dibujo que hizo, que tenía los elementos de Eternia, que le estuvimos mostrando recién. Escribió la Biblia, trabajó durante 2 años con el departamento de marketing y diseñadores directamente. Dice que todos tenían que estar satisfechos. Yo no sabía qué iba a pasar. Yo no estaba contratado para hacer la serie. Yo vivía muy cerca de ellos, así que iba y venía todo tiempo. Era consultor del show. y durante un año le estaba probando todas las historias que salían de Filmation para la serie. Dice, a veces no le gustaban las notas que le daba de las historias, pero yo era responsable de la reputación de Mattel, que fueran presentadas de manera apropiada. Pero está la Biblia y la forma que escribieron los personajes y diseños fueron muy importantes para el show de televisión, porque tenían que tener vida por más que fueran animados. Bueno, repito, trabajó un año en Filmation. Después de eso le dieron una tarea que era hacer un show live action. Una de las cosas que se le ocurrió es que Skeletor tenía un lugar de donde trabajaba, desde donde operaba, y se le ocurrió la idea de la montaña serpiente. Y le dijeron, ¿y cómo luce la montaña serpiente? Y dijo, no sé. Así que, bueno, una vez que escribió el guión, fue al hijo. El hijo tenía 13, 14 años y que tenía en su momento una gran imaginación. Para que sepan, el hijo de Michael es uno de los más grandes animadores de CGI en este momento del mundo. Y dice, bueno, en ese momento, 13, 14 años, tenía una muy buena imaginación, y Craig le fue y le preguntó, ¿qué te parece, cómo luciría la montaña serpiente? Y el hijo de él hizo justamente estos dos bocetos que vemos acá, con su propia letra. Y dice, bueno, obviamente los de Mattel no le pagaron, dice, yo le di un avance de su mensualidad, y le pareció divertido. Y bueno, así que bueno, eso les quería contar porque ese es el secreto oculto de cómo nació la montaña serpiente. ¿Vieron? Qué lindo. Increíble.
Historia pura.
Por favor, un paréntesis, antes de que empiece con la serie de Filmation. A mí me gustaría a ver cómo fue el tema, porque Mattel arranca sacando un minicómic con cada figura, ¿no? Con cada figura que la hacía Alcalá, Teixeira, diferentes artistas, y al principio era un bárbaro, era un salvaje. Los primeros libros de Alcalá era así, era un salvaje que salvaba a una diosa, y esa diosa lo dotaba con una armadura mágica y demás. O sea, él eso lo llegó a conocer, lo llegó a ver, ese origen, ese principio, o directamente empezó con que Adam era el hijo del rey, en su imaginación. ¿Cómo arrancó ese momento?
Okay, Michael. So this is also a great question. Penley's on fire today with great questions. Okay, so before you joined, Mattel had with each figure a mini comic. I don't know if you've seen those from different artists like Alcalá.
I wrote 10 of them. I wrote 10 mini comics.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking about before you joined. The problem was a barbarian who saved a goddess who gave him an armor. Did you see that origin, or did you just, when you joined, did you take it your own way? Adam being the son of a king and all that.
There was a problem with the origin stories. Almost every one of the mini comics had a different origin story, and that really they published, I think, 5 of them. And I looked at it and I said, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. You can't have 5 different origin stories and do the animated series. You need to have an origin story. So what I did is I created the origin story, which has to do with Marlena as an astronaut, leaving Earth, going through this tunnel, the space vortex, ending up crashing into Eternia, and then people on the ship, all of whom are angry and pissed off. I'm sorry for the language. Are angry with Marlena because she's such a great astronaut. Evelyn, who becomes Evelyn. She's always been sort of jealous of her, and then the other people on the ship all have their own, agendas. And when it crashes into Eternia, into the planet, they get thrown into the other side of Eternia, where Skeletor is, and they, because of the, don't ask me why I invented this whole crazy idea, but somehow the environment of that side of the planet literally changes them. So that Evelyn becomes Evelyn with magic powers, and Biff becomes the Beast Man, and the optical engineer becomes Triclops and things like that. And that's what happens to them. They become all weird, and now they're going to try and get even with Marlena, who's on the other side, and she's married to the king Randor, and of Eternia, and she's becoming, she's popular and everybody loves her. She's a great person, except they don't love her. And that's the story. That's the origin story of all the characters. And then I had to take each of the characters themselves and say, who are they? Who are these people? For instance, Man-at-Arms, his real name is Duncan, by the way. His real name is Duncan. He's a Man-at-Arms. He creates all the armor and the sci-fi toys and everything else that they use for He-Man. Then you have the others. And then I had to have who, for instance, was Teela. Originally, we don't know who Teela is. All we know is that Man-at-Arms gets a message from the sorceress to go into the mountains. We did this in one of the episode that I wrote. I had this in it. I only wrote one episode because animation doesn't pay royalties, so I said I'm not going to write any episodes. But they finally ended up asking me to write one when they did the reboot in 2002, and I did the reboot for them. They called me back to do the reboot, so I did the one called I have the title something of man anyway. It was back to basically the origin of what happened on Eternia. And I wanted to do that story because I thought it was important for the kids to know it and everybody else to know it. Anyway, so I took all this stuff and I said, it's got to be real. It's got to, first of all, the important thing about writing something like this, it's like writing comedy or drama. If you're writing an action adventure show, as an example, you as the writer have got to believe that what you're writing is real, even though it's fantastic. It may never happen. For instance, on almost all action adventure shows, at least when I was writing them, you would have cars crashing and things like that. And people would just open up the door to the car and sort of walk out and say, oh, what happened? Oh my gosh, I'm dizzy. I'm going to faint. Nowadays, they die. We didn't do that in those days. But in reality, if you have an accident like that, you're going to be dead. But we didn't do that. We made sure everybody lived for whatever, for good or bad, Anyway, so you have to approach that kind of story, saying this is real for me. If I don't feel it's real, the audience will feel it's fake. The audience will see behind that image, and they will say, "This isn't real. This is nonsense." But they've got to feel that it's real, and that's exactly where I always came from in writing all of my TV shows, and I always injected into my TV shows pro-social moments, and they were cloaked within the context of the show. Though it wasn't like writing. There's a wonderful story that. Samuel Goldwyn used to say, if you want to send a message, use a telegram. You don't send the message. You don't send a telegram in a TV show. You use the story itself to basically make it within the context of what you're writing. So all of that becomes part of it. I know this sounds like I'm teaching a writing program, which I did, but that's what was going on here. So that's what happened. But in terms of He-Man, I had to create the show and create all the characters, and I had to believe they were real people in a real place, in a far-off land, on a foreign empire somewhere in space. Because after all, when you think about it, it's both sci-fi and primitive. And normally that doesn't work together. That doesn't go together. But if you believe it works together, then the audience will believe it and they will accept it. The other thing that I did was I used mythology as part of the creation of the show. Because when you use mythology, you're using archetypes. And the audience recognizes those archetypes whether they realize it or not. And they identify with the characters. That's what makes it work. If you can't identify with the characters, whether it's Prince Adam or He-Man or Orko or whoever it is, then the show will not work. That's the reason it worked. By the way, that's the reason a lot of some of the new versions of He-Man, it's the reason they failed. Because they didn't recognize that you have to understand and recognize the characters. You have to feel that you know them. You may not know why you know them, but you know them because they're archetypes that exist in the real world. That's my secret. I don't know about anybody else's secret, but that's my secret. It's my secret of writing. Anyway, what happened was they hired me and I did it, and I was on it for a year. Then, 20 years later, they called me up and said, we want to reboot the show. We want you to come back and do it. And I did it. And fortunately, the new version was closer to what I wanted to do originally, which is sort of more based on a mythological idea. And if you said you have that Bible that I wrote for the reboot, and I don't know if you have the one that has all my storylines in it.
¿Cuál es la Biblia que tenemos acá, Serginho? ¿La tenés en la computadora? Porque quieres saber si tenemos la que tiene todas las historias que escribió Michael.
La que yo tengo es la del 82.
The one that we have here is from 1982.
Okay, that's not the right. That's not the one I'm talking about. That's different. That's totally this is the one I'm talking about.
De la que está hablando.
That's the New Masters of the Universe.
The New Masters of the Universe Bible.
Eso debe ser del 2000X. Sí. Por eso, hacer la traducción, Gus, de todo esto y después seguimos con 2000X.
That's one version, but the final version that I wrote has all the storylines.
Okay. Michael, I'm going to go ahead and translate until now, and it seems that from now on we're going to be starting with 2000 next with the new version. So I'm going to read all of this. Bueno, el problema con las historias, como estábamos empezando, ¿no? De si él había leído Alcalá y todas las historias anteriores, dice que ya había 5 minicómics, y dice cuando llegó él, dijo, acá tenemos 5 minicómics con 5 historias de origen diferente. Y les dije a los de Mattel, esto no tiene sentido, no podés tener 5 historias diferentes y además una serie con otra historia. Así que lo que hice es creó la historia, la Biblia, ¿no? Marlena era una astronauta que dejaba la Tierra, pasando por el vórtex espacial, chocando en Eternia. La gente que estaba en la nave, algunas se enojan con Marlena porque ella era una gran astronauta y termina pasando esto. Por ejemplo, la idea de Evelyn, que se termina convirtiendo en Evelyn. El nombre normal era Evelyn y todos los de su nave tienen cada uno su propia agenda. Cuando chocan, la mitad cae de un lado, del lado donde está Skeletor, y los otros quedan con Marlena. Los que quedaron del lado de Skeletor, dice, de ese lado de la isla había algo que los hacía cambiar, que los transformaba en raros y malos. Por ejemplo, al mecánico se terminó convirtiendo en Triclops, después el hombre bestia. Y bueno, nada, les agarra un odio y quieren vengarse de Marlena. Y ahora ella, del otro lado, se casa con Randor, el rey de Eternia, que es muy popular y todos la aman. Y de ahí básicamente nace todo. Tuvo que tomar los personajes y adivinar quién es cada uno. Man at Arms, por ejemplo, su verdadero nombre es Duncan. Él es el hombre que crea las armas y las cosas de ciencia ficción. Tuvo que crear a Tila, porque solamente sabemos que Man at Arms recibió un mensaje de la reina Sorceress. Así que lo que hizo en el episodio que escribí, que dice de paso, escribió un solo episodio para la serie original porque dice que no le pagaban royalties y por eso no escribió más. Y en el reboot que hizo en el año 2002 escribió todo el origen completo de Eternia. Le dice, me pareció importante que los niños y todos supieran cuál era el origen original. Agarró todo esto y dijo, tiene que ser real, es como escribir comedia o drama. Si escribís una aventura de acción, tenés que creer que es real, aunque sea fantástico y no pase nunca en la vida real. Por ejemplo, tenés autos chocando y abren la puerta y se bajan y dicen, ay, estoy medio mareado, me voy a desmayar. Pero en realidad alguien choca así con un auto y se muere en la vida real. Dice, tenés que encargarlo de una forma diciendo, esto es real para mí. Si no, la audiencia no lo va a creer y va a darse cuenta que es falso y no va a tener sentido. De ahí sale como yo escribo, mi secreto para escribir mis shows de TV, con cosas prosociales, cosas que van pasando en la actualidad y las mete escondidas dentro de los guiones. Dice, por ejemplo, Sam Baldwin le dijo, si querés mandar un mensaje, envía un telegrama. No mandas un mensaje a través de un show de TV. Lo usás dentro del contexto, así que lo que hago lo uso dentro del contexto de la historia. En términos de He-Man, dice, tuve que crear el show, los personajes, y tuve que creer que eran reales, en un lugar real, en un imperio lejano en el espacio. Si lo ves, es ciencia ficción y primitiva. Normalmente no suelen ir juntos de la mano, pero si crees que van juntos, la audiencia lo va a creer. Otra cosa es que usó mitología. Al usar la mitología usás arqueotipos, es la palabra. Aunque creas o no, logran identificarse la gente con los personajes, con el príncipe Adam, He-Man u Orko. Porque si no te identificas con el personaje, el show no funciona. Por eso, dice, fallaron mucho las cosas que vinieron después de lo que escribió él con respecto a He-Man, porque dicen no entender a los personajes. Dice, el objetivo tuyo como un escritor de una buena historia es sentir que lo conoces al personaje. No sabes de dónde viene, pero tenés los arqueotipos para contarlos. Lo hice y bueno, gracias a eso, el laburo que hice originalmente, lo llamaron 20 años después, cuando iban a hacer el reboot del show, y por suerte este reboot era muy parecido a la idea original que yo tenía cuando se había juntado con Mattel.
Bien, Gus, antes de que enganche con 2000X, le quería hacer una preguntita, ¿no? Él también estuvo involucrado en la creación de Shira, El secreto de la espada, la película, si él tuvo algo que ver también.
So before we jump into 2000X, because yes, we do have several questions on that, Michael, and I hope we're doing fine with time. I know that it's been an hour and a half.
It's okay. My wife already had her dinner.
All right. So before we continue with 2000X, Sergio would like to know if you had any type of involvement with Shira, the secret of the sword, the movie, or any of that.
No, they ignored me completely. They called me in, by the way, when they were getting ready to do all that, and they wanted my advice. They didn't pay me, but they wanted my advice. And I gave them my advice. And part of the advice I gave them was what I just told you. I said, it's going to fail if you don't maintain the idea of the original, what it was all about, and in order for the audience to relate to it. Otherwise, the series is going to fail. And it didn't work. I mean, later and that was after the 2002 reboot, by the way. And they listened to me, they thanked me, they appreciated it. I met with the writers of the show, and then they totally ignored everything I did. I said, okay, but I was going to show you this. This is, by the way, this is only part of it. I wrote 20 storylines for the new version for 2022. Matter of fact, the date on this is October 23rd. Yeah, October 23rd of 2002. And this is only part of it, but there were 20 storylines that I wrote for this. The titles one was called Mechanex's Lament, The Night of the Shadow Beasts, The Underworld. Each one of them has a log line and a synopsis. And I wrote everything so that we would have the storylines now they didn't always follow this, but that's okay. It's, I'm not in control of the show once it's out of my hands. But that was what I'd hoped they would do. The one that I wrote, which was an interesting show, that they asked me to write, and they gave me more money than they normally do for a script because they said they don't give royalties. I said, I'm not going to do it unless I get more money for it. Well, it's important, because if I'm worth something, you got to pay for it. That's what it's about. If they didn't want me to do it, they would say no. and I'm not, I don't have an ego like that, except, my wife wants to buy something over there. She's got to have the money. At any rate, I did the show, and I wrote the script. And what happens is, in the very beginning of the episode, and you probably saw it, Adam and Tila are writing on these discs, these that they play around with, and all of a sudden the power goes out, and everybody, the discs drop to the ground, they fall to the ground. They think maybe it's something normal that's going on in the power in Eternia, and it turns out all the power in Eternia is slowly diminishing, and they're trying to figure out what it is. Even Skeletor is being affected by it, and everybody's wondering, what the hell is this? So they end up. Well, there's a subtext, there's a sub story which I won't go into. A B story where Marlena crashes her ship because of the power. She's flying in from an ambassadorial meeting with the Minotaurs, and the plane crashes, and it crashes in a place called the Cave of the Labyrinth, the labyrinthine cave, which Cringer remembers from the days when he was, they were prowling around the planet, and they found this place. It was kind of an interesting interesting bunch of caverns, and he helps rescue Marlena. That's a sub story to everything else that's going on. But the story itself is, He-Man is trying to find out what is going on with the power, and he finds this cavern where all these wires and cables are going across the floor. And there is a person who is like, you can see his face, but you don't see, it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz. You see his face, but you don't know who he is. And he speaks with this thunderous voice. He says, "You are destroying the planet. And before you destroy it, I'm going to show you what it's going to be like if it's destroyed. I'm taking all the power, all the power that you're using to make all these devices and all these things. I'm taking that away from you, and you will have to live like primitives." And He-Man he finds out who this guy is. He's actually someone from the past who was there originally on Eternia when when the wars were started between Skeletor and the good side. And he tells the story of the origins of Eternia and He-Man, and actually about who Tila really is, and all of those things. He tells that story in this episode. And that's the story I wanted everybody to hear and see. And eventually they did the episode almost like I wrote it, not quite, but good enough, so that if you didn't know anything about the planet and everything else, you learned it with this one episode. And I was very glad I did it, and I'm glad they decided to shoot it to do the animation the way I wanted it. But I thought it was important, and it had all the elements that I was looking for to make it into like a magical, not in the sense of mystic magical, but a magical episode that meant a lot to me, at any rate. And how and they changed it a little bit later on when they did the series. They changed Skeletor. They made him into he was he had been Randor's brother. They made that was what they did. I didn't like that idea, but okay, that I wasn't paying to produce the show. That was Mattel's idea, so that was okay. But that was sort of what I wanted to do. And it worked. I'm trying to remember the name of the show I wrote. God, isn't that terrible? I can't remember the title of the show. Something of...
¿Ustedes se acuerdan el nombre del episodio ese en el que tienen el problema en 2000X con lo que empieza con Tila y He-Man que están haciendo un deporte en unos patines voladores y como que se corta la energía y He-Man tiene que encontrar cuál era el problema que estaba con energía en Grayskull. No sé si lo recuerdo. Ese es el episodio que lo escribió Michael y no se acuerda el nombre del episodio y quiere recordarlo. Así que bueno, si alguno me lo puede tirar ahí en el chat también en inglés, así se lo pasamos a Michael. Matt, we were asking the audience right now for the name of the episode because
I know what it was. I know what it was. Of Machines and Men. Of Machines and Men.
Of Machines and Men.
Yeah. That was it. That was it. I just looked it up.
Lo buscó en internet. Qué bueno, ¿no? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and translate all of this, Michael. This is absolutely amazing. This is absolutely amazing what you're telling me here. And we're telling us here. I'm sorry.
And by the way, in the episode, he has a big battle with Skeletor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because Skeletor, because all the power that's being taken out of Eternity is really being kept in this, in basically, you would say a safe, but it's, it's a magical box that it's being saved in. And of course, Skeletor wants that box because that's power that he could use to control the planet. And so they have a big battle to prevent them from getting it. And at the end, the guy who's doing all this, the wizard, I call him the wizard decides that He-Man is the person who needs to be the one who saves the planet. And of course, He-Man saves the planet.
Absolutely. That is an absolutely fantastic story, if not the best story. Okay, I'll go ahead and translate this. Dice, bueno, que lo llamaron, que querían hacerlo, querían mi consejo para hacer 2000X. Perdón, Serginho, esto era a respuesta de lo que... Lo llamaron porque querían hacerlo, querían mi consejo, pero no le iban a pagar, pero bueno, igualmente le pidieron consejo. Pero bueno, lo ignoraron por completo. Dije más o menos lo que les dije a ustedes, me dice, manteniendo la idea del original. Si no mantienen esa idea van a fallar, porque la audiencia tiene que relacionarse con los personajes, por si no funciona. Y dice, bueno, me escucharon, me agradecieron, pero me ignoraron por completo. Después, ya saltando a 2000X, escribió 20 historias para el año 2002. Dice, las escribí para octubre 23 del 2002. Acá los tengo, 20 historias. Por ejemplo, El lamento de Mechanec, La noche de las bestias sombras. Y lo que hizo, bueno, es escribir el capítulo y una sinopsis de lo que quería. Dice, no siempre seguían mis consejos. Está bien, porque yo no controlaba el show. Pero bueno, esperaba que hicieran las cosas que él iba escribiendo. El que sí escribió, que justamente fue el del que estábamos hablando recién, dice que le dieron más dinero del normal. Le dije, bueno, yo lo escribo al capítulo pero bueno, me van a tener que pagar un poco más de lo normal porque no le iban a pagar royalties después. Y dice, no es que lo hago por ego o por nada por el estilo, es que si mi trabajo vale, me lo van a pagar. Si no vale mi trabajo, no me lo van a pagar. Si no, me hubieran dicho que no. Dice, no es que tengo ego por tener más dinero, dice, pero mi esposa le gusta comprarse cosas, así que bueno, tuve que hacerlo por plata. Hizo el show, escribió el guión, y lo que pasa es que al principio del episodio, bueno, como les estaba contando a ustedes, Adam y Tila están montando unos discos voladores, y como que se corta la energía, la electricidad, los discos se caen, ellos se caen al piso y piensan que es algo normal que está pasando, pero se dieron cuenta de que toda la energía en Eternia se estaba terminando. Hasta Skeletor se ve afectado. Todos se preguntan qué es esto que está pasando, y bueno, había una subhistoria donde Marlena iba en una nave y choca también por esta energía. Iba a una reunión con los minotauros, embajador Acon Minotauros, si no me equivoco. Choca en la cueva laberíntica y dice, bueno, Cringer recordaba la cueva de cuando se encontraba, bueno, caminando por toda Eternia, con una cueva de sus viejas épocas. Era parte de la subhistoria, pero la historia es que He-Man tiene que entender qué pasa con energía. Termina encontrando una cueva con cables por todos lados y hay una persona que le podés ver la cara, pero tipo el mago de Oz y con una voz media rara, pero no sabes quién es, y le dice que He-Man y todos están destruyendo el planeta y te voy a mostrar cómo va a quedar todo si lo seguís destruyendo. Te voy a sacar todos y van a tener que aprender a vivir como primitivos. Bueno, He-Man termina encontrando que es un tipo del pasado que estaba originalmente cuando las guerras empezaron entre Skeletor y los buenos, y cuenta la historia de origen de Eternia y de He-Man y de quién es Teela en realidad. Cuenta toda la historia en este episodio. Quería que todos vieran y escucharan esta historia. Lo hicieron casi completamente como él le escribió, y dice, si no sabías mucho de lo que es el origen de He-Man y Eternia, aprendés mucho del planeta y de la historia con este episodio. Dice que le parecía muy importante contar esta historia a él, y tenía básicamente todos los elementos que él quería. Magia, repito, un episodio que significó mucho para él. Cambiaron un poquitín la historia. Por ejemplo, hicieron que Skeletor, el hermano de Randor, dicen, no me gustó la idea, pero bueno, no me pagan por producir el show a mí. Por eso lo que quería hacer era, pero esta era lo que yo quería hacer, el capítulo se llama The of Machines and Men, y termina con una gran batalla con Skeletor, cuando todo el poder de Eterno lo termina metiendo este hombre en una caja, así tipo una caja de seguridad, una caja fuerte, y Skeletor quiere esa caja para tener el poder para controlar el planeta, y al final el Wizard, como lo llamó él a este tipo del Mago de Oz, que hacía todo esto, decide darle a He-Man el poder y decirle, sos vos el que tiene que salvar el planeta. Como le dije, me pareció uno de los mejores episodios, de las mejores historias que hay, ¿no? Justamente de He-Man. Necesito líquido, chicos.
Ahora, es impresionante esto nuevo, ¿no? Que es la etapa de que Skeletor es el hermano de Randor, que se llamaba Keldor. Toda esa historia, la verdad, me parece interesante y rica. No sé, está buena. Lo que sí quiero saber algo, quiero que resuelva algo, a ver, o
A
por
ver,
lo
a ver.
menos su opinión, porque hay algo que ha quedado, más en 2000X, ¿quién es el padre de Teela? ¿Por qué? Porque en 2000X, como bueno, en Filmation, Randor es el padre adoptivo de Teela. Sí sabemos que la madre es Sorcerer, pero el padre de Teela siempre quedó ahí, ¿quién será? Y en 2000X, en la serie esta 2000X, hay un capítulo que hay un hombre, ¿no? Que conoce a Sorcerer, que ella sale del castillo y mantiene una relación con este hombre, que este hombre tiene un brazo, una mano, enyesada, grande, y tiene la cara también toda vendada, entonces no lográs ver quién es. Entonces, se supone que por el tipo de color de piel, por el tipo de color de pelo, por tener una mano grande, como que siempre quedó la historia que el padre de Teela es Fisto. Ahí está. Ahí me gustaría saber su opinión, qué opina de esto, como para cerrar esta historia.
Necesitas respuestas para poder dormir de la noche, vos y muchos eternianos del mundo.
Es algo que va a resolver, o por lo menos que me invente algo que yo me quede tranquilo.
Hacenos feliz, Michael.
Ok.
Decile esa parte final, por favor.
Makes us happy. Ok, dale. All right, Michael, sorry, I was taking notes on that question in Spanish. Well, Pelu was saying here that he thought that the Keldor story was fine and in a way rich, but he wants to know, and I think that we all want to know this, but if you can resolve this conundrum for us, or at least if you can resolve it for us, give us your opinion. Who Teela's real father is, because in 2000X in Filmation, Randor is the adoptive father. Sorcerers, of course, we know this is the mother, but the real father, for example, in 2000X, there is a man who knows Sorceress, who has one big hand that has like a cast and his face covered. And we suppose, because of the color of the skin and the big hand, that his actual real father, Teela's father, is Fisto. So we wanted to know if you could tell us what your opinion is with this, and if you can in any way makes us happy with your answer.
I doubt it. I wrote the story about Teela, the discovery of Teela. The sorceress tells Man-at-Arms to go into the mountains and find Tila. That there's someone there that he has to take in his own care. And what he finds is an egg. And the egg cracks, and Tila's inside that egg. The sorceress is the mother. But you've got to remember, the sorceress is also a falcon. She can change into a falcon. She's basically a bird. We don't know who the father is. And that's okay. Could be, artificial insemination as far as I'm concerned. But the egg cracks open, and here's this little baby inside. And so Man-at-Arms takes her at the bequest of the
Sorceress.
The sorceress, the bequest of the sorceress, and takes her and adopts her as his own daughter. That's the story. You want to figure out who the father was? You're gonna have to look for another bird. That was my feeling about it.
Okay.
I don't want to go any farther than that. You can use your imagination. It's magical. It's like Venus rising out of the water. Who was Venus's father? Well, it was Zeus really, but she rises out of the water and she's there. I wrote a script once for Falcon Crest called Venus Rising, which actually opens up with one of the stars of the show coming out of a lake, and she's nude from the back, because after all, it's network television. You can't really see her, and it's called Venus Rising. And it was that's sort of the idea that I had for this also, and that's where it's from. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't know who the father is. I'm the father. Okay, there you go. I'm the father.
Lamento decepcionarte. Yo soy padre, dice. Dice, duda mucho que sea Fisto. Escribió la historia de Tila, del descubrimiento de Tila. Dice que Sorceress le dijo a Man-at-Arms que vaya a buscar a alguien adentro de una caverna, y cuando llegó encontró un huevo que se estaba abriendo, y ahí adentro, cuando se abre, hay un bebé. Tenés que recordar que Sorceress es un halcón, y bueno, la verdad no sabemos quién es el padre, y eso está bien, dice. Puede ser que hasta sea inseminación artificial. El huevo se abre, hay un bebé adentro, Man-at-Arms se la lleve y la adopta por pedido de Sorceress. ¿Querés saber quién es el padre, Pelu? Usa tu imaginación. O busca otro pájaro, dice. Es como cuando escribí un capítulo de Falcon Crest que se llamaba Venus Rises, que empezaba con uno de los personajes saliendo del agua de espalda desnuda, pero obviamente era un programa de televisión, no mostraban nada. Pero esa es la idea. Dice la idea, que es la misma idea que también la sacó para Falcon Crest de acá. Pero dice, bueno, Pelu, yo soy padre también, no sé si esto sirve de algo, por lo menos.
¿Hay alguna pregunta ahí de los espectadores?
Sí, y algún comentario también, porque vi muchos comentarios de amor y saludos para Michael.
Comentale un poco acá, cuenten un poco, así están los chicos también.
Bueno, acá hay una pregunta de Gonza. Dice, desde el día que escribió la Biblia Motu hasta el día de la fecha, ¿cuántas veces lo consultó Mattel para diferentes proyectos, incluido la nueva película?
Okay, one of the guys that is watching with us tonight is Gonzalo wants to know, since you wrote the Masters of the Universe Bible until today, how many times did Mattel reach out to you for different projects, or did they even reach out to you because of the new movie coming out soon?
No. The only thing they reached out to me was to do the reboot in 2002, and then after that, they asked me to come in just to talk to me about the series, talk to me about He-Man, and I did as a favor to Mattel, and that was it. That was the end of it. I never heard back from them again. I once wrote to the president of Mattel. I talked to him and I said, I created the show. I said, I think you're going in the wrong direction. I said, you need to get back to where the show comes from, what the show is all about. I said, it's a show about archetypes, and I said, you're just destroying that. And I think that's I'm not saying that people aren't going to watch the show because it's interesting and all that. And I'm not jealous about it either, because after all, it's not my project. It isn't my toy. It isn't I didn't create the characters themselves. I created who the characters were, which is important. It's as important as anything. But, I have no control over anything else in the show. Mattel owns everything, by the way. They own everything. I don't own anything in the show. So I wish I did. I wish I had created a couple of toys. I would be, I wouldn't have to do this. No, I'm kidding. I don't mind doing it.
You'll be here talking about toys. So you'll be here.
Right, absolutely. By the way, Gus, I just want to just mention one thing. I am impressed at your memory, how you remember all this. It's incredible. It's like you've got a recording machine in your head.
I wish it was all in the mind, but what I do is I type super fast and I write everything and then I read it all. I type it in Spanish though, so I read it in Spanish.
Okay. I just thought it was amazing that you could just do that. I mean, as I said, I recognize some of the words. I can hear what you're reading, and I mentioned this to somebody else on the show before. I think Sergio. I mentioned this to Sergio, that I actually directed when I was much younger. I directed Spanish language programming, and my Spanish was pretty good. I mean, I could do it. I did it. I was a producer for a TV up in Monterrey, Salinas. I was worked for a TV station up there, and I was the producer for a show called La Hora Mexico. And the guy who was the star of the show, I mean, he was a Mexican American, and he had been in the Navy. He had been a commander in the Navy, and it was his show. And we used to run Spanish language films. And I directed that show, and then later I was directing. I was a vice president of production for an educational company in Los Angeles, and we had some films that we wanted to redo in Spanish. So I went down to Mexico, in Mexico City, and I hired the actors. I had a wonderful friend who was from Chile, who translated all the scripts into Spanish, and I spoke pretty good Spanish. So I was able to direct the shows, and that worked very well. The funny thing that happened in Mexico, though, was that I was in the hotel, and I got a hold of the operator, and I was trying to call home to my wife. And I started speaking in Spanish, and she said to me in English, she said, "Señor, your Spanish is very good, but I am learning English. I will speak English to you, you will speak Spanish to me, and we will learn together." That was the phone operator. I said, "It was wonderful." So that's what we did.
Muy bien. Dice que no, solamente en 2000X, después de 2000X, no volvió a hablar de la serie. Mattel no le volvió a hablar nunca más de la serie de He-Man. Dice que hablaron una sola vez, pero lo hizo como favor, no era nada programado. Y dice que después de eso nunca más nada. Una vez dice que le escribió directamente al presidente Mattel, y me gustaría saber por qué serie le escribió al presidente Mattel. Dice, yo creé básicamente el show 2000X y le dije, yo creo que están yendo por un lugar que no va. El show es acerca de arqueotipos y lo están destruyendo. No digo que no, la gente no lo va a mirar. Dice, tampoco estoy celoso porque no es mi proyecto ni son mis juguetes. Yo creé lo mío en su momento, pero de esto no tengo control de nada. Y le dije, bueno, que no estaba bien lo que estaban haciendo. Mattel dice, son los dueños de absolutamente todo. Y dice, ojalá hubiera criado algunos juguetes, por ahí no estaría haciendo esto acá con ustedes. Y le dije, bueno, si hubieras creado juguetes, también estarías acá con nosotros hablando de juguetes. Dice, también dirigió un show de TV en español, que fue muy bueno, fue productor de un show también en Monterrey, La Hora México. Él dijo que el protagonista era un mexicano-americano que había sido un comandante de la Marina. Y dice, bueno, eran shows en películas en español, dirigió el show, también fue vicepresidente de una empresa de educación en Los Ángeles, que lo que hacían era enviaban programas que querían rehacer en español, así que fue a México, contrataban los actores en México, dice que también tenía un gran amigo chileno que traducía los guiones, y dice, una vez me pasó algo muy gracioso estando en México, estaba en un hotel, levanto el teléfono para llamar a mi esposa, me comunico con la operadora, y nada, y empecé a hablar en español a la operadora, y la operadora me empezó a hablar a mí en inglés, y le dice, su español es muy bueno, pero yo estoy aprendiendo inglés, así que usted me habla en español y yo le hablo en inglés, y hablamos cada uno en su idioma practicando.
Exactamente.
Exactamente.
Por ahí está lo que decía él del huevo de tila.
Yeah, there you go. That's when he discovers Tila. There you go.
Ahí está, exactamente lo que decías, ahí es cuando descubre a Tila. Muy buen momento. Chicos, dígame.
Sí, acá hay una preguntita de Neo Tigre. ¿Quedó pendiente? Ahí está. ¿Quedó pendiente algún reino o especie que no haya salido en la serie 2000X?
Question from Neo Tigre. He wants to know if there was any pending kingdom or species that did not come out in the 2000X series, Michael.
There were a lot of characters that they created that they were going to try and use, and they decided they wouldn't do them. I have some pictures of them somewhere. These are sketches that were done originally for it. Let me find out. Where are they? Let's see.
Quiero copia de todo.
I mean, Mattel tried to. They tried a lot of things, and if it didn't work, it didn't work.
Estaba hablando y estaba muteado. Dice que se crearon varios personajes, pero decidieron no usarlos. Dice, si me dan un minuto, tengo fotos, sketches originales que no se usaron.
For instance, these are sketches that were made for some characters that never got into the show, and they had things like, we did a show called Claw Guys. It was episode number 22 in the new version, and it was a crab-like species that lived on Orcas Island, and they were called clawful species, what they were. And they communicate by making clicking and clacking sounds with their claws, kind of like lobsters do. And they can wedge themselves into cracks and the crevices and leap out at you at the unexpected moments. I don't know if they ever got into the show or not. I don't think so. But that was one of them. All kinds of things that they tried before. I'll tell you something that Mattel did. This is funny. It has nothing to do with He-Man, by the way. When I first went to meet with Mattel, they showed me a lot of things that failed as toys. One of them was called Growing Up Barbie. You're all familiar with Barbie, right? Growing Up Barbie. Okay, they made a toy with Barbie where if you pushed a button on her back, she grew breasts. They just came out. And when they put that on, they did tests with that with girls who would buy Barbie, and when their mothers saw that, they had an absolute fit, and they said, we're not going to permit you to even sell these things. We will go on strike. We will order people not to buy any Mattel toys if you put this on the market. They never put it on the market, but they showed me the toy itself. And it really, that's exactly what happened. You push a button in the back of Barbie, and she grew breasts.
Oh my gosh, I cannot even imagine the archives, what they have in there. Wow. Stuff like this makes no sense. Oh my gosh. Let me just tell this to the people. Oh my gosh. Bueno, ahí mostró unos pequeños sketches de cosas que no llegaron a hacer. Es decir, tiene una carpeta llena de personajes y especies que no se llegaron a usar. Dice, por ejemplo, una de las especies que sí se lograron usar es una que vive en el planeta de oro con el episodio 22, creo que se llama La Isla, el episodio. y que se comunicaban haciendo ruido con pisas tipo cangrejo. Y dice, pero lo que te tengo que decir con respecto a esto de cosas que no hicieron Mattel es algo gracioso. Me mostraron en Mattel juguetes que fallaron. Dice, por ejemplo, uno de los juguetes que se llamaba Growing Barbie, o sea, sería como Barbie creciendo, y era una muñeca de Barbie que tenía un botón en la espalda y cuando vos la apretaban le crecían las tetas. Y dice que llegaron a fabricarlo y a hacer una prueba con nenes, y dice que las nenes se ponían a jugar y apretaban el botón y los padres que estaban ahí viendo como los nenes hacían el testeo de mercado, y dicen, ustedes no vamos a hacer que ustedes saquen esto al mercado de ninguna forma, vamos a hacer una huelga, vamos a hacer a pedir a la gente que no compre absolutamente nada de Mattel. Y dice, me lo mostraron, lo tuve en mis manos y era una cosa así. Y yo le comenté, le dije, no me quiero imaginar los archivos de Mattel, los juguetes y cosas así que debe haber, ¿no?
Debe ser una locura todas las piezas que deben tener.
Totalmente.
Eh,
Vamos 2 horas ya. No sé cómo estamos de tiempo. Michael, it's been 2 hours. I don't know how your time is looking like.
I'm going to have dinner pretty soon.
Va a tener cena. Okay. 10 more minutes? Is that okay?
10 more minutes is fine. Yeah.
10 minutos más, Sergio, así que elijamos las preguntas. Yo voy a hacer una preguntita rápida antes que nos vayamos, porque es una cosa que tengo pendiente en mi corazón. Acerca de Star Trek The Next Generation, él escribió un capítulo que se llama Lonely Among Us, que trata acerca de 2 especies que se viven peleando entre ellos, y quiero, bueno, como él dijo, es una persona que le gusta meter realidades y temas políticos dentro de los capítulos, así que diría que si me puede contar un poquito de eso. Michael, before we continue with the rest of the 9 minutes that we have left, I just wanted to just take a little quick detour because Star Trek is very dear to my heart, and I know that you wrote the story for Lonely Among Us. Yes. And you mentioned before that you always try to mingle social things between your scripts, and I think that this is the most perfect example with the species that are in war. So I don't know if you could tell me something about that.
Well, Lonely Among Us actually was originally titled Lonely Among Men, because that's a quote from Thoreau. And the producer, Gene Roddenberry, said, no, we can't, that's not appropriate. That's not politically, accurate, good. We need to say lonely among, that they changed the men to lonely among us, or whatever it was. I can't remember now. Just one word, but that was the reason for that. And I understand that. But Lonely Among Us really deals with misunderstanding of the other. As from the show, it's if you're familiar with the episode, they're in space and they see a matrix in space and they don't exactly know what it is. And then all of a sudden, something from that matrix ends up not somehow, but there's a reason it gets. By the way, the sub-story, I didn't write the sub-story, which was about the cannibal stuff. I didn't write that. That was D.C. Fontana wrote that. But the original story was an entity enters the ship. And as it enters the ship, it invades each person on board the ship, which then reveals their hidden egos and ids, which emerges as a result of that. And the captain, Patrick Stewart at the time, he finally realizes that this is an entity that's only trying to get home. Now, this will resonate with people who watch it, who remember E.T. What was E.T.'s goal? I want to go home. It's like, it's like a boy and his dog. He finds a dog that's been lost. The dog wants to go back home. The kid wants to keep the dog. That's basically what E.T.'s all about. And that's what this show's about, except it deals with an entity that they're not familiar with. So he decides to take the entity back into the Matrix. And they're concerned that the captain will be destroyed somehow. But he knows what he's doing, and he saves, and he comes back to the ship, and everything returns to normal. Once they realize that they were dealing with was just a juvenile who's trying to get home to his mother. That's all that story's about.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. Perdón, chicos, me tomé un pequeño desvío porque quería hablar un poquito de Lonely Among Us. Es un capítulo de Star Trek, la nueva generación. Que dice, bueno, sale la frase es el título de un quote de Ferro, que es Lonely Among Men. Cuando lo escribió, Gene Roddenberry le dijo, no es políticamente apropiado usar ese quote, así que vamos a poner Lonely Among Us. Y bueno, le cambiaron el título, dice, no entiendo por qué, pero lo cambiaron. Pero ese capítulo se trata justamente de los malentendidos con otras personas. Si estás familiarizado con el capítulo, aparece una Matrix en el espacio y algo se mete dentro del Enterprise y hace que cada persona revele su ego interno. Hasta que el capitán Picard, Patrick Stewart, se da cuenta que la entidad lo único que quiere es volver a casa y dice, como todas las historias, que yo escribo que resuene con algo. Por ejemplo, E.T., que quiere volver a su casa, un perro perdido, que un nene se lo quiere quedar, pero quiere volver a su casa. Y dice, bueno, la gente no conoce, es una entidad, y bueno, tenía miedo que el capitán se mande alguna y haga que se destruya la nave, y en realidad lo que quería es llevar la entidad de nuevo a su casa con su mamá, porque la entidad era un nene, por ponerlo de una forma. Así que bueno, de ahí salió Lonely Among Us.
Let me give you a postscript to the story.
The postscript, sure.
Postscript. I read the Bible for Star Trek, and in the Bible, Roddenberry writes that at the time of Star Trek is taking place, everyone has solved their internal problems. Nobody is jealous, nobody is this, nobody's that. And I went to Gene Roddenberry and I said, Gene, what the hell do you write about? Nobody hates each other. There's no dislike. And he said, well, you figure it out. And that's when I did this. So I figured it out by doing that show. I said, okay, everybody's okay until this entity enters and releases all that hidden stuff that's within people, because that's what makes people human. And that's why I did it. And they liked it. They did the show. It's fine.
Oh, and you know what? I'm going to have to make a little short about your description here, so we can put it on the side too, because this is a great bit to finish that episode and the reason why on that episode. Me dice, te voy a dar una breve nota post-guión. Dice, yo leí la Biblia de Star Trek escrita por Gene Roddenberry, lo mismo que estamos hablando de Motu acá, pero de Viaje a las Estrellas. Y dice, básicamente, en la época de Star Trek, ¿qué es lo que uno ve? Todas las personas resolvieron sus problemas internos. Las personas no trabajan por plata, trabajan por ser mejor persona. Y dice, me fui a Gene y le dije, bueno, y entonces, ¿qué quieres que escriba? Porque nadie odia a nadie, nadie está celoso de nadie, todo está perfecto. Y dice, bueno, vos encontrás la forma de hacerlo. Y dice, ahí se le ocurrió el tema de la entidad que se metiera dentro del Enterprise y se metiera en la parte oculta del ser humano y sacara lo peor del ser humano y revelara las miserias internas y escondidas que tenemos cada uno adentro. Así que de ahí se le salió la idea. Mira, le pasó por encima a Roddenberry, lo pasó por el costado a Roddenberry. Muy bueno. Disculpen, chicos, nuevamente que me tuve que desviar de Motu. Sigamos con Motu.
Está perfecto, está perfecto.
Gracias. Cheers. Agua igual.
Cheers.
Vamos todos, aprovechemos.
Bueno, ¿alguna otra preguntorra especial? Nos quedan 5 minutitos más.
No, en el chat, bueno, agradecen por la invitación. Tremendo invitado, un abrazo fuerte desde México.
Okay, these are some greetings for you. Andres from Mexico saying hi, great guest. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing all your stories.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you very much for taking my question. One of the things that I like about 2000X is that expanded Eternia with different kingdoms. A pleasure to hear a real writer of fantasy science fiction showing a great respect and understanding for the genre and its audience. That is a good one.
I'll take that. I'll take that one.
Una sola cosita, a ver si le podés comentar, Gus. A ver qué opina Michael. ¿Qué es lo que él cree que después de 40 años todavía siga existiendo esa magia por He-Man, ¿no?
Sí, y después, ¿sabes qué? Hay una pregunta de Natalia Benck que podríamos cerrar con esa. Me gusta después, pero primero. Okay, so 2 more questions, one from Pelu, one from the audience, and I think that those 2 are going to be a great wrap up for the chat here, Michael. And really, thank you for everything. Pelu wants to know your point of view on why do you think that after 40 years we're still talking about this, and we're like little kids spending to see the new movie, and the toys are still in the shelves and in Walmart. What do you personally think that is the reason?
Well, I said this earlier. Much of what I wrote in what we did with He-Man, although it's not obvious, because if you make it obvious, it doesn't work. But what I did is I used all of my knowledge of mythology to write this. So almost all the characters in He-Man are archetypes, characters that are actually, you can find in, it's Samson, it's Ulysses, all of those things, and all of the people involved in the thing, from Circe, Evelyn is like Circe, the siren who tempts Ulysses, for instance. People may not know, may not realize it, but they recognize the archetypes that are all around us. And I think that was the basic success of the story, of the series. And I think that's what keeps going, because people identify with the characters. If they don't identify, then you've done nothing. You have nothing to do. There's nothing exists. It's when you identify with the characters, no matter how fantastic they are. Why do we identify with Superman? Why do we identify with Batman? Because we identify with them because they're here. First of all, they're heroes, of course, but they're battling for good. And innately, most of us want to battle in our own way for goodness. And in today's world, especially in the United States, we need that. We need the understanding that there is a goodness in everybody that can be utilized to help others. That's where I come from anyway. I don't know about anybody else. Maybe I'm being too Pollyannish, but that's the way I feel about it. I've always felt that way. And I've always been,
That's fantastic. Esta respuesta es fantástica y ni siquiera sé si la próxima no descarrilaría lo que fue este cierre de entrevista. ¿Sabes qué me parece? Voy a hacer, si no se enojan, voy a leer la respuesta a esta pregunta después de preguntarle la pregunta de Natalia.
Dale.
Después leo la de Pelu. Michael, I want to read the answer to Pelu's question as the last one, because I don't think that we should be closing with this one that I'm going to read right now. So I'm going to save that one for after this one. Which one is your favorite character from Masters of the Universe?
Which is my favorite character?
Yeah.
Well, Adam. I love Adam. Prince Adam, I think, is terrific because he represents the alternative side of He-Man, the gentleness, the kid, the playfulness. Just like I like Teela. Teela is the playfulness, but she's also she represents the feminine spirit that we should recognize in all women. She's strong, she's tough, and she doesn't take crap from Adam, and Adam knows who he is. He knows that he is two spirits in one. He's this kid, but he's also been given this goal, this project of life, and that's given to him by the sword when he's originally given it to him. We never did I don't think we ever did an episode like this, but when anybody else tries to touch the sword, they can't touch it. Only Adam can touch it, and he raises it above his hand and says, I have the power, and then He-Man, right? But He-Man works because He-Man uses while he's strong and tough and all that stuff, he also is very good at using his wits, his wisdom, to solve most of the problems that surround him.
Okay.
Excelente. Así que bueno, voy a leer la respuesta a la pregunta de Natalia Ben. ¿Cuál es su personaje favorita? Adam, lo amo, dice, genial, representa la alternativa de lo que es He-Man, un caballero juguetón. Después tenés un personaje como Tila, juguetona, pero representa el espíritu femenino que tenemos que ver en todas las mujeres, fuerte, dura, y no acepta ninguna boludez de Adam. Adam sabe quién es, sabe que son dos espíritus en uno. Es un nene que le dieron un proyecto en la vida, que es cuando le dieron la espada, cuando le dieron la espada del poder. Creo que nunca hicimos un episodio así, pero solo Adam puede tocar la espada, nadie más. Solo Adam sirve porque es fuerte, pero es bueno usando su sabiduría para resolver todos los problemas. Así que ahí básicamente tenés la respuesta para todos, ¿no? Adam y Tila. Y ahora volviendo a la pregunta de Pelu, que esta me parece genial para cerrar con Michael. Pelu, ¿me podrías repetir cuál era tu pregunta?
Claro, después de 40 años, ¿qué es lo que él ve que sigue motivando? Exacto.
Para Michael dice, es lo que les dije antes, mucho de lo que escribí con He-Man no es obvio, porque si lo haces obvio no funciona, pero usé todos mis conocimientos de mitología, arqueotipos como Sansón, todos esos, toda la gente involucrada, desde Circe, por ejemplo, Evelyn es como Circe, la sirena que embauca a Ulises. La gente puede que no se dé cuenta, pero reconoce el arqueotipo que nos rodean. Ese fue el éxito básico de la serie. La gente se identifica con estos personajes, porque si no te identificas no existe nada. Cuando te identificas, no importa qué fantásticos que sean los personajes, nos identificamos igual, como Batman y Superman. Primero, porque son héroes, pero porque pelean por el bien, y la mayoría de nosotros queremos pelear por el bien, como por ejemplo en el mundo de hoy, en especial ahora en Estados Unidos, necesitamos eso, necesitamos gente de entendimiento que está en todos nosotros y que todos podamos ayudar a otros a hacer el bien. Toma.
Mejor el estadio.
Cerramos el
Se merece un aplauso. La respuesta está, se merece un aplauso.
Okay. I want to just give you one little funny episode.
Nos va a dar un episodio muy gracioso.
In one sentence, if you watch the beginning of every episode of He-Man, and he goes like, he raises his sword, and he aims it at Cringer, and Cringer turns into, Battle Cat, and he roars, he roars. When Filmation originally did it, he wasn't roaring. What he actually says is, "I have the power too." And I said, wait a minute. He's a tiger. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't speak. He's a tiger. Mattel agreed with me. We changed it so that when he opens his mouth, he just growls. But if you watch his lips move, you'll see him saying, "I have the power too." That's a secret. That's just been. I just revealed the great secret.
Oh my gosh, that is so good. That is so good, Michael. That is so good. It reminded me of the new TV show, We All Have the Power. Right now, it's not He-Man anymore. It's just a bunch of people. It's not. We don't like that.
Right.
Dice, les voy a dejar una cosita muy graciosa para que sepan todos ustedes. Cuando miran la intro de todos los episodios, cuando He-Man levanta la espalda y dice, "By the power of grace, Bunny", y la apunta a He-Man, a Cringer, y se transforma en Battle Cat. Siempre, creo que todos nos imaginamos lo mismo viendo la traducción en castellano, que decía algo, pero siempre uno dice, bueno, en realidad en la versión original decía, "Yo también tengo el poder", pero Michael se le acercó a Mattel y les dijo, "Chicos, es un tigre, el tigre no habla inglés, no habla el tigre", y Mattel dijo, "¿Sabes qué? Sí, tenés razón", y bueno, lo sacaron y pusieron a Battle Cat gruñendo, pero la frase original es, "Yo también tengo el poder", y dice, si lo miran, dice, le miran los labios y dice, "Yo también tengo el poder".
En la
Todos
versión,
mirando la intro esta noche.
No, pero en la versión en español hay capítulos que dice, "Y yo también tengo el poder". Hay capítulos que lo dicen. La versión en español.
You heard that, Michael? In
Yes.
some Spanish episodes, it does say that. I also have the power. In Spanish.
In
En
Spanish?
español, sí.
Oh, and they did it in Spanish?
Yeah.
Sí.
They
It's all
kept it in
in
the
Spanish.
I didn't know that. Oh,
I want to find one and I want to send it to you. Yeah.
Okay. It was a great being with you. I enjoyed it. It was a long session, but it was interesting.
Absolutely. And listen, if we had the time, we'll do it for 4 more hours or 5.
Oh, God. By that time, I'll be really gray.
Michael, we love you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being part of our lives since
Thank
we
you.
were kids.
Okay, signing off.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Qué genio, che, qué genio.
Impresionante.
Me encantan los buenos contadores de historia y te juro me puedo dar 18 horas. Tiene 85 años, Michael, y se quedó con nosotros un montón de tiempo. Divino, y una mente fresquísima.
A mí lo que me mata de todas las historias es cómo se van saliendo ramificaciones que de repente estamos escuchando o tratando de ver la historia Motu, ¿no? La Biblia, nos enteramos data de Jim Dean, o sea, viene todo es impresionante. Esas cosas son increíbles. Esa data es impagable, boludo, o sea.
Totalmente.
Somos el mejor canal, loco, somos el mejor canal de YouTube.
No sé si somos el mejor, pero tenemos unas historias muy copadas, ¿eh? Hay cosas que son... Uf.
Ni hablar. La verdad, loco, la verdad es increíble. Hemos tenido fuera de joda. A nivel coleccionista, a nivel particular, ¿no? Después, bueno, mucha gente, espero que también lo disfrute con nosotros. Hemos tenido a Rubén Moya, a Mark Taylor, que hemos tenido gente muy importante del mundo de He-Man. Hace poco Axel Jiménez, que es más de la actualidad, a Derek Gable, gente involucrada con la película, aquel que está viendo por primera vez Ultimate, mire todos los demás videos, hay lindas cosas, la verdad que hay una data muy interesante.
Muy rica las entrevistas.
La verdad increíble, che, muchas charlas que tuvimos en lo personal, como
igual
siempre decimos.
A mí tila de un huevo no me va, no me va.
No, sí, pero si te pones a pensar, salió de huevo.
Minuto con él acá, no. Igual Keldor lo dijiste en la cara. Keldor me va, a vos no te va.
Keldor sí. No, pero lo de huevo no. Esa no va. Me quedo con el que el padre es Fisto, boludo.
Mentite vos mismo.
Hola, Vito.
Un hermoso, che.
Vamos a comer, vamos a dormir.
Dale. Che, bueno, gracias por lo que estuvieron acompañándonos.
Mañana no se trabaja, Yo no trabajo.
¿Ya
te vas a dormir, Sergio? Vos, bueno, pero vos sí. ¿Vos
no, voy a comer algo y no sé. ¿Salimos?
¿Te vas a un boliche a bailar?
Sí.
Yo necesito descansar la garganta y los dedos durante 17 días. La primera respuesta que me dio, chicos, escribí 2000 palabras. Yo iba contando las palabras que iba escribiendo. Me aparecen abajo las cantidades de palabras. 2000 palabras. Dije, ay, Dios mío, lo que voy a tardar en responder esto. Pero no, terminó siendo fabuloso. Es un muy buen contador de historias.
No,
encontraste a alguien de igual a igual.
Puede ser, ¿no? Pero muy bueno. Me gustó de dónde venía y que se hacía valer por sí mismo. Y bueno, y para los que no saben, la mayoría no saben, ¿no? Hicimos varias pruebas para asegurarnos porque Michael no usa Windows, usa Apple y todos los sistemas que usamos nosotros para transmitir no son compatibles con Apple, así que tienes que descargarte un Chrome, un Firefox y nada, estuvimos hablando un montón de tiempo y cada vez que hablaba con él, cada prueba era estar 1 hora, 1 hora y media escuchando historias. Es un muy buen contador de historias. El padre murió a los 101 años y él tiene bueno, hablando de genética hablábamos, pinta que va a ir para ese lado. El 85 está Flamatronic, así que va a seguir escribiendo. Tiene su página, miren el logo, no está acá en el canal de YouTube abajo, los links para su trabajo, si quieren mandar un mensajito. Es muy cordial, como lo vieron.
Punto. Qué bueno. No hablamos del libro.
El libro.
Poné el libro acá, la imagen, todo, así ya queda.
Dale. Sí. Vamos a hablar nosotros del libro.
No la tengo a mano.
Se llama Out of the Storm. El Holocausto de la Esperanza, del autor de Michael Halperin. Sale el 25 de noviembre del 2025. Va a estar obviamente en Amazon y por todos lados. Alex y Mila Roslan y sus hijos, una pareja ordinaria de Polonia, rescata a unos hermanos judíos del gueto de Airwolf, que increíble, ¿no? Pero no puedo traducir. Traduzco en vivo, pero no puedo traducir leyendo. Bueno, y hacen que estén protegidos durante todo el Holocausto y dentro del post-Holocausto, dentro de las aventuras, de las odiseas aventuras a través de Europa. Una historia de rescate de una familia judía por una familia polaca. Bueno, obviamente es descendiente de judíos Michael Halperin, y todos los libros que escribió, la mayoría, se dedican a esto. Así que bueno, si quieren chupar un poquito, si quieren mostrar el código QR y quieren ayudarnos con una visita también para él, de agradecimiento por meterse, sería genial. Así que tenés la imagen por ahí, Serginio.
Perdón, estaba en otro lado. ¿Qué?
Estaba comprando en eBay. Poné la imagen del libro, Sergio.
Si podés poner la imagen del libro, Serginio.
La imagen del libro, no la tengo descargada.
Dame un minuto y la voy a poner yo acá. No, esto es una cosa, da falta de profesionalismo que me asusta, pero está bien. Esperamos un segundo.
Había encontrado otra foto que la voy a dejar para cuando salgamos.
Dale. Che, decime cómo hago, porque estoy acá, pero no tengo ni idea cómo mostrar una página. ¿Puedo mostrar en mi computadora?
Sí.
Compartir pantalla. Pantalla completa. Permitir. Bueno, vos dale entrada. Y acá está.
Ahí está.
Si pueden meterse a ese QR, Out of the Storm, el holocausto de la esperanza. Miren qué linda tapa. Y acá tienen dos detalles con el número del libro, detalles del contribuidor. Michael quería que hablemos de esto, pero bueno, la verdad nos fuimos por las ramas con todo, así que, bueno, Michael, si estás viendo o miras después, en otro momento por ahí podemos hablar de este libro. Gracias, chicos, gracias por la compañía, gracias a todos los que se quedaron, gracias a ustedes, gracias, Raymond, un abrazo gigante a donde estés. ¿Preternia? ¿Puede ser? ¿Preternia?
Mirá la foto que voy a dejar.
Ahí está, mirá qué lindo, boludo. ¿Cuánto pelo había?
Eso estaba buscando.
Muy buena foto, ¿eh?
Nos vamos con eso.
Dale. Abrazo gigante para todos. Gracias, muchachos.
Chao.